The movie opens with a hauntingly quiet scene. A woman named Mindy sits all by herself in an eerie and unsettling atmosphere, her body slumped, her face blank and haunted. Her mind drifts, lost in an endless cycle of thoughts that only seem to grow darker with each passing second. Then, suddenly, a faint voice emerges from another room, slicing through the stillness. The voice is low and drawn out. Reluctantly, Mindy pushes herself up from the chair, her movements slow and weighted, as if each step brings her closer to something she dreads but cannot avoid. She walks toward the other room, her footsteps measured and careful, each one seeming to echo in the quiet house. Her hands tremble slightly, betraying her fear, though her expression remains calm and controlled. At the doorway, she pauses, taking a long, deep breath, as though summoning every last bit of courage she has left. With a tired resolve, she loosens her gown, letting the fabric slip down to reveal her bare arms and torso. Her skin is marked with a series of fresh cuts and bruises, some barely beginning to heal. As she extends her arm, offering it toward the darkness that lurks in the shadows of the room. From within the shadows, a figure steps forward, moving with an unnatural grace. It is difficult to make out any clear features. The figure is cloaked in darkness, and its shape seems to shift and blur, as if it is not fully solid. There is an aura of malice that surrounds it, a dark energy that fills the space around it. Without hesitation, the figure reaches out, seizing Mindy's arm with a grip that is both firm and cold. The cause of her suffering is a monster named Agar, a flesh-eating creature who lives in the basement of her home. Agar is not an ordinary monster that kills instantly. Instead, he feeds on Mindy gradually, taking small bites from her body whenever he is hungry. Every time Agar rings a bell, Mindy is forced to go down to the basement and offer herself to him. Agar bites her slowly, causing both physical and emotional pain, and leaves her body covered in scars. Mindy endures this torment to protect her daughter Alice, whom she has sent away to her grandmother's house. She knows that Agar would gladly attack Alice if she fails to satisfy his hunger. He has made it clear that he will not hesitate to go after Alice if Mindy stops coming down to him when called. Mindy's face tightens in pain, her body trembling slightly as she endures the creature's feeding. She barely flinches, her eyes staring blankly ahead, her expression a mixture of agony and resignation. It is clear that she has gone through this many times before, a grim routine of suffering that has become all too familiar. Once the figure is finished, it releases her. Letting her arm fall limply to her side, Mindy stumbles back, her hand instinctively going to her wounded arm, where fresh blood seeps from the bite marks. With a weakened, unsteady gait, she retreats to the bathroom. There, she begins the grim task of cleaning her injuries. Her movements are slow, almost robotic, as she carefully applies antiseptic to each wound. She has done this so many times that the routine feels automatic, like a ritual she is forced to perform over and over. Her expression remains blank, her eyes dull and empty, as if she has disconnected herself from the pain. She patches herself up with practiced efficiency, tending to each wound with a cold detachment. After she is done with the treatment, Mindy makes her way to the kitchen, her steps sluggish, each one seemingly harder than the last. She prepares a simple meal, heating up some food, and sitting down to eat. But there is no real hunger in her eyes. She goes through the motions of eating, but her movements are listless, as if the energy required to chew and swallow is almost too much. Her gaze is distant, her mind elsewhere, lost in a sea of fatigue and despair. As she eats, the phone rings, breaking through the quiet with its shrill sound. Mindy blinks, momentarily startled, before reaching for the phone. It's her mother on the other end, her voice filled with concern. Mindy's mother has been caring for her young daughter, Alice, ever since Mindy claimed to be too unwell to look after her. Mindy had told her family that she was suffering from a mysterious illness, hoping to hide the true horror of her condition. Her mother, however, suspects something darker, possibly drugs. The worry in her mother's voice tugs at Mindy's heart, but she remains silent, unable to share the truth of what is happening to her. The conversation ends, and Mindy is left alone. She sits there for a few moments, lost in thought, before deciding to take a bath, hoping the feel of the water might bring some comfort. As she stands over the shower head, the blood from her wounds swirls into the drain, but they don't disappear. The sight of her own blood no longer shocks her. It has become a familiar part of her life. Each bruise, each scar, is a reminder of the torment she endures daily. Her body, once strong and full of life, is now covered in marks that may never heal. She feels herself fading, becoming a shadow of who she once was. The following day, Mindy drags herself to the local grocery store, going about her shopping in a daze. She is wearing a hat and sunglasses, but even with those she isn't fooling anyone. Her skin is pale, her cheeks hollow, and there are deep shadows under her eyes. The friend approaches, offering help, concern evident in her eyes. Mindy forces a weak smile, insisting she's fine, though her voice lacks conviction. After a brief, awkward exchange, she quickly excuses herself, hurrying out of the store. Her heart pounds as she leaves, shaken by the encounter. When she returns home, she finds the dark figure whom she calls Master, waiting for her. Its presence fills the room with a chilling aura, casting a shadow that seems to consume all light. She approaches it with a resigned acceptance, standing still as it begins to feed on her once again. This cycle of suffering has become her life, and she endures the pain in silence, her eyes staring blankly into the distance, her mind retreating as she tries to escape the agony. Days blend into each other in a grim, repetitive pattern. Master's feeding sessions leave her weaker and more drained each time, her body slowly deteriorating under the strain. Her mind, too, is affected, worn down by the unending torment. Yet she continues to submit, trapped in a situation that seems to have no escape. One afternoon, in a rare moment of reprieve, Mindy sits down at her old piano, the keys covered in dust from disuse. Her fingers hover over the keys before she finally begins to play. Her touch is hesitant at first, but then she gains confidence. A soft, melancholy melody fills the room, a faint echo of the happiness she once knew. For a few precious moments, she loses herself in the music, her face softening as she allows herself to feel something other than despair. But her moment of peace is short-lived. A loud knock at the door shatters the silence, jolting her out of her reverie. She freezes, her heart racing as she listens. The knocking comes again, insistent. With a sense of dread pooling in her stomach, she stands and makes her way to the door. Standing outside is a woman from Child Protection Services. The woman wears a smile on her face, but on Mindy's face is just anxiety. The woman explains that she's there to check on Alice, having received reports about Mindy's declining health. Mindy feels panic rising within her, but she tries to remain calm, attempting to convince the woman that everything is fine. But the woman's gaze is sharp, her eyes scanning the room and taking in the clutter, the signs of neglect. She makes her way inside, as she observes the unsettling atmosphere that clings to the house. The woman's attention is drawn to a door leading to the cellar, where a faint noise seems to be coming from below. Her expression becomes more suspicious, and she takes a step toward the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Mindy's heart skips a beat as she watches, her breath catching in her throat. She knows what lies beneath, the dark secret she has been forced to keep hidden, and the thought of someone discovering it fills her with dread. She subtly tries to redirect the woman's attention, offering excuses and explanations, but her words seem to fall flat against the woman's growing suspicion. Ignoring Mindy's attempts to stall, the woman pulls the door open and peers down into the dark cellar. She hesitates for a moment, then steps down, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Mindy stands frozen, her pulse racing, every muscle in her body tense as she listens to the creak of the steps and the rustling sounds coming from below. Eventually, the woman leaves, and Mindy and Master are all alone again. Master wants Alice to come and live with them, but Mindy fears the worst. She's not about to put her little girl's life at risk. She's barely getting by. How much more Alice? There's no way she'll survive this level of torture. Mindy knows that bringing Alice back will only put her daughter in grave danger, but the pressure continues to mount, his voice echoing in her mind, relentless and persuasive. The woman from Child Protection Services, Sonia, is still very suspicious of Mindy and unsatisfied with her previous visit, so she comes to visit again. Unfortunately, this is her last visit as she doesn't make it out alive. Sonia is concerned about Alice's well-being, as Mindy's physical and mental condition has drawn suspicion. When Sonia arrives, she becomes suspicious of Mindy's behavior and decides to investigate further. Mindy's heart skips a beat as she watches, her breath catching in her throat. She knows what lies beneath, the dark secret she has been forced to keep hidden, and the thought of someone discovering it fills her with dread. She subtly tries to redirect the woman's attention, offering excuses and explanations, but her words seem to fall flat against the woman's growing suspicion. Ignoring Mindy's attempts to stall, the woman pulls the door open and peers down into the dark cellar. She hesitates for a moment. Suddenly, there is a muffled sound, a quick, sharp cry, followed by a chilling silence. Mindy's face pales as she realizes what has happened. She doesn't dare move for a few moments, frozen by a mixture of horror and relief. When she finally gathers the courage, she slowly descends the stairs, her hand gripping the railing tightly. She reaches the bottom and finds the woman lying motionless on the floor, her face twisted in an expression of terror, blood trickling from her wounds. Master stands nearby, watching Mindy with a cold, predatory gaze, his hunger momentarily sated. Feeling numb, Mindy backs away, shutting the cellar door behind her as she returns to the main floor. The weight of what has just happened presses heavily on her, adding to the already overwhelming burden of fear and guilt she carries. She retreats to her bedroom, curling up on the bed and wrapping her arms around herself, her mind reeling with the knowledge that Master will not stop until he has consumed everything in her life. Her strength is fading, and with each feeding, she feels herself slipping further away from who she once was. One day, Mindy grows desperate and tries to find a way to escape this daily torture. She decides to bring a substitute victim for Agar, hoping he will accept another person instead of her. Mindy dresses up and goes to a bus stop at night, where she meets a shy, introverted man named Paul. Paul is lonely, lives by himself with only his cat for company, and is unlikely to be missed if he goes missing. Mindy convinces Paul to come back to her house, pretending she just wants company. Once they are home, Paul quickly notices something is wrong and becomes uncomfortable. Mindy, however, insists he stays and gives him a bowl of strawberry ice cream laced with sleeping pills. Paul begins to feel unwell, eventually passing out and throwing up in the bathroom. Mindy drags him down to the basement and offers him to Agar, hoping that the creature will accept him as a replacement meal. At first, Agar is reluctant and unimpressed. He prefers to feed on fresh, living flesh and seems to find Paul unappetizing. However, when Mindy assures him that Paul is still alive, Agar takes a bite. Almost immediately, he spits out the piece, disgusted. He claims that Paul tastes of misery and despair and does not satisfy his appetite. Agar's preference is for victims who have something to lose, which makes them taste better to him. This is why he prefers Mindy, as she is desperate to protect her daughter and carries a sense of fear and hope that Agar finds delicious. Realizing that her attempt to replace herself with Paul has failed, Mindy has no choice but to continue offering herself to Agar. Despite everything, Mindy realizes she cannot keep Alice away forever, and eventually decides to bring her daughter back home. When Alice returns, Mindy struggles with the decision of whether to tell her about Agar. One day, she decides to reveal the truth and takes Alice down to the basement to confront the creature together. However, when they reach the basement, they find it empty. Agar is nowhere to be seen, and the room appears normal. This absence makes Mindy question her reality, wondering if Agar is a manifestation of her own mind. Things become tense when a new social worker arrives at her door, a man who introduces himself as the supervisor of the woman who had visited before. His demeanor is calm but authoritative, and his eyes hold a steady gaze as he surveys Mindy, noting the tension in her posture and the weariness etched into her face. He explains that he's concerned about the previous agent's sudden disappearance and needs to check on Alice's well-being. But just when things seem to be settling back to normal, there's a knock on the door. Alice opens it and finds Agar standing there, dressed in a top hat, scarf, sunglasses, and a formal suit. He introduces himself to Alice as Mindy's friend and asks her to inform her mother that he stopped by. Alice relays the message, and hearing Agar's name throws Mindy back into a state of panic. That night, Mindy had tried to relax, taking a long, refreshing shower to wash away the stress of the day. She closes her eyes, letting the water cascade over her, the warmth soothing her tense muscles. For a brief moment, she allows herself to feel safe, to imagine a life free from fear and pain. But now that Agar has arrived, the peace is short-lived. A sudden, ominous feeling settles over her, and she hears the faint sound of the doorbell ringing through the quiet house. Mindy's heart races as she realizes that he is here, inescapable, a presence she can no longer ignore or avoid. Suddenly, strange noises begin to fill the house. Low, guttural growls echo through the rooms, mingling with faint, unsettling whispers that seem to come from every direction. The walls vibrate softly, as though the house itself is alive, reacting to Master's presence. A faint red glow begins to seep under the door, casting an eerie, shifting light across the floor. Mindy remains close to Alice, refusing to let go. The red glow intensifies, filling the room with a sense of impending doom. Every creak of the floorboards, every unsettling noise, heightens the fear that has gripped both mother and daughter. Mindy can only worry about her child's safety. She feels trapped, with no clear path of escape. The red light pulses, shifting in intensity, casting twisted shadows across the walls. The sounds grow louder as if Master is moving through the house, searching for them, his presence filling every corner with dread. Mindy feels Alice trembling beside her, the child's small hand gripping her mother's arm tightly. Mindy's own fear is overwhelming, but she knows she cannot afford to let it control her. She has to stay strong, for Alice's sake. She understands now that she cannot continue running, hiding, or enduring Master's torment in silence. If she wants to protect Alice and end this nightmare, she must confront him directly. Mindy decides to put an end to this once and for all, for her sake, for her daughter's sake. She picks up a knife ready to attack, the cold metal reassuring in her hand. As she steps into the hallway, she sees Master emerging from the shadows. His figure looms larger than before, his presence more menacing, as though he has grown stronger with each feeding. His eyes gleam with a malevolent satisfaction, a twisted grin stretching across his face. He stands there, waiting, daring her to make the first move, fully confident in his control over her. Mindy doesn't let go of the blade. She's ready to face her oppressor, her gaze fixed on the dark figure before her. But before she can strike, Master raises a hand, and an invisible force washes over her. The knife slips from her hand, clattering to the floor as her arms go slack, her body no longer obeying her will. She feels herself being pulled forward, her legs moving of their own accord, each step bringing her closer to the creature she has come to fear. Her mind screams in resistance, but her body betrays her, drawn toward Master by a force she cannot fight. She stops just inches away from him, trapped under his gaze, unable to move. Master's face is filled with triumph, his power over her complete. He reaches out, his cold fingers brushing her skin as he prepares to feed on her once more. But before he can continue, a new presence makes itself known. Alice, small but determined, steps into the hallway, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and defiance. She has seen enough to understand that her mother is in danger, and, despite her terror, she is unwilling to let her mother face this monster alone. Without hesitation, Alice throws herself at Master, her small hands clawing at his shadowy form. Her actions surprise him, and for a moment, his grip on Mindy loosens. Seeing her daughter's courage, Mindy feels a surge of strength return to her, a fierce determination sparked by Alice's bravery. She breaks free from Master's control, her movements fueled by desperation and love. Together, Mindy and Alice attack Master with a ferocity born from months of fear and pain. As they continue their assault, the Master's face contorts in horror. He is no longer the one in control. The tables have turned, and he is now the one fighting for survival. Mindy and Alice press on, driven by the memories of all they have endured, refusing to relent. They continue to tear into him, each strike diminishing his presence further until he is barely more than a wisp of shadow. Mother and daughter stand together, breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits unbroken. For the first time, a sense of calm settles over the house. The weight that had hung over them for so long has finally lifted. They look at each other, their faces filled with quiet relief and a shared understanding of the nightmare they have survived. Without words, they embrace, finding solace in each other's presence, both aware that this ordeal has changed them forever. The movie ends with Mindy and Alice standing over Agar's body, having finally defeated the monster that haunted them. It's left unclear whether Agar is a real creature or a manifestation of Mindy's fears, but the final scene shows mother and daughter united in their victory, ready to reclaim their lives.